They kept excellent records. I will say that for them. Whatever else I think of the Verith, and I've thought a great deal about them in the years since, they were meticulous. Every session logged, every outcome catalogued, every injury assessed, healed, and filed under its proper designation before the next cycle began. They were not cruel in the way we use the word. They were indifferent, which is worse, because indifference has no lever you can pull. I know the number they assigned me. Fight log 0341. I know it because I read it upside down off their desk on the day they finally decided to speak to me directly, and by that point I had been in their facility long enough to recognize their written numerals by sight. 412 days. That is how long I had been counting the ceiling seams in my cell before a Verith administrator named. I'll approximate it. Something like Orvith finally sat across from me and opened a dossier. He set the folder on the low surface between us and smoothed it flat with a four-fingered hand. Gray-green skin, slightly translucent at the knuckles. I had studied those hands for over a year through observation glass. I knew the way that particular hinge joints stiffened when one of them was preparing to deliver news they considered final. Orvith's hinge joint was stiff. He began to speak in the clicking compound language they use among themselves, and then the translation rig on the table rendered it into something I could follow. The voice was flat and procedural. It told me that my assessment period was concluding. It told me that my recorded data was comprehensive and that the facility was satisfied with the sample size. It told me, with a particular brand of bureaucratic courtesy that only a species capable of abducting people from their homes can manage, that I would be returned to my point of origin within the next 2 of their day cycles. I looked at the dossier sitting between us. Fight log 0341 was stamped in the upper left corner of the cover sheet, upside down from where I sat, in the blue-gray ink they use for permanent designations. Below it, my height, my weight on intake, my blood type as best they had decoded it, and a series of outcome tallies arranged in columns. I did not read them all. I did not need to. I have been keeping my own count. Before I go, I said, I'd like to ask one question. Orvith's stylus paused above the line where he was about to sign the release form. The hinge joint did not relax. If anything, it went a degree stiffer, the way it did when a variable entered a calculation that had already been considered solved. You have been collecting data on us, I said. How we sustain damage, how quickly we heal, how long we maintain performance under stress, how we respond to extended isolation, how we respond to prolonged conflict without defined termination. I kept my voice even. I had practiced this particular sentence in myself for most of the last 2 months, and I had kept my voice even through every practice run. I'm curious whether you ever collected data on what we do when we're not being observed. The stylus stayed where it was. Because you gave me a cell, I said, with a ventilation grill that faces the corridor that runs behind your administrator wing. In your shift rotation, the guards, they follow a 19-period cycle. Your facility runs on a base 11 time system. 19 periods does not divide cleanly into your standard maintenance window. So every 67th of your day cycles, there's an overlap window of approximately 4 of your subunits, where the corridor behind your administrator wing has no direct coverage. Orvith's eyes, 4 of them, arranged in a shallow arc, moved very slightly, in a way I had cataloged as recalculation. Your interior atmosphere is maintained at a slightly lower oxygen saturation than my home environment, I continued. Enough that a human acclimates within 30 days. Enough, also, that a small but measurable change in my metabolic output is detectable if you know what to look for, but your monitoring equipment was calibrated for binary readings, fit or unfit, so it never flagged the adjustment. You recorded outcomes. You did not record preparation. I let that sit. Orvith's stylus had not moved. The hinge joint was, if anything, doing something I had not seen before, a faint tremor, very slight, that I had privately labeled contingency stress and observed exactly twice in over a year of watching through observation glass. The first time was when a piece of their own equipment failed unexpectedly. The second was now. Your dossier on me, I said, nodding toward the folder, contains 412 days of outcome data. It does not contain the fact that I have been counting ceiling seams. It does not contain the fact that I know your internal scheduling cadence to within 2 subunits accuracy. It does not contain the fact that I have tracked 17 separate staff members by gait pattern alone, distinguished between them reliably in low light conditions, and established which 4 of them are the administrative decision makers versus which ones are the operational staff, who simply follow what those 4 decide. I paused. You catalog how hard I could hit. You never asked what I was thinking between the sessions. The room was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a conversation waiting to resume, but the quiet of a system that has encountered an input it did not anticipate and has not yet generated a response. I had sat in enough of those pauses on the other side of them to recognize it. You were saying, the translation rig rendered, after Orvith had clicked something I could not fully follow, that you used this period to conduct your own study. I'm saying your record is incomplete, I said. Fight log 0341 documents what I did when you were watching. It doesn't document what I was building when you weren't. I reached out and turned the folder so it faced me. He let me. 412 days is a long time to have nothing to do but watch and think. Orvith looked at the folder, then at me. What? The translation rig said, slowly, did you conclude? And here is the thing I will tell you about that moment. If you ever find yourself in a room with a species that has spent over a year treating you as data, do not answer the question they ask. Answer the question underneath it, which is always, have we made an error in our assessment of risk? I concluded, I said, that you are an extremely cautious people. You collect information before you act. You do not like uncertainty. You design your facilities to eliminate variables. The overlap in your shift rotation isn't a flaw. It's a test to see whether a subject notices it. Several of your apparent procedural inconsistencies are baited. You want to know how observant we are? Orvith was very still. We are, I said, very observant. I closed the folder and slid it back across the surface to him. I also concluded that you are not going to do anything to me that deviates from the release procedure you have already filed with whatever authority you report to. Because you file everything. And deviating from a filed procedure would create a record you do not want. That's not a threat. It's just a reading of your institutional character based on 412 days of data collection. I stood up from the low chair, which required some adjustment, because it had been built for a body that sat differently than mine. I am ready to go home whenever you are ready to send me. Orvith's hinge joint did not relax for the remainder of the processing time. They sent me home 2 days later, exactly as the procedure specified. I arrived in the same coordinates I had left from at approximately 3 in the morning local time, and sat in the damp grass for a while looking at the sky. The official record, if they kept it, says Fight Log 0341. Assessment period concluded. Subject returned per protocol. Sample data comprehensive. It doesn't say what I learned. It doesn't say what I noticed. It doesn't say that somewhere in whatever archive they keep, there is a release authorization signed by an administrator whose hinge joint was trembling when he signed it. I have thought about them often in the years since. I think about Orvith specifically, about the way that hinge joint moved when something entered his calculation that he had not planned for. I do not think he was frightened, exactly. I think he was the administrative equivalent of a person who has just noticed that a room they believe they were standing in alone has a second occupant who has been there the entire time. I think they are meticulous, careful, and genuinely thorough. I think they collect data with extraordinary precision. I think they made one mistake, and it was the same mistake that any species makes when it decides that the subject of a study is only a subject. They forgot to wonder what the subject was studying back.